Okay, the following episode contains some adult language, themes, violence. Yeah, that's in there. Offensive stuff too. Jeez, like all the time with him, actually. Okay. Listen. Elton, he's just a shining example of what these adult content warnings are all about. So, kids shouldn't be listening at the very least. Otherwise, listen at your own risk, I guess. I warned you. I tried.
The following episode allegedly contains a drinking game. How exciting, right? The key word to remember, should you decide to play, is will. When you hear it, it might be a trigger to, I don't know, toss back a shot or something. Fairly simple, yeah? I mean, maybe it is. We're not condoning anything, to be clear. However, were there to be an alleged imbibing sport to be had, it's not that complicated. Should you not, participate, that's okay. You're still able to openly shame and chastise those that are, doing it, as it were. The alleged sport of carousing. Sure, let's call it that, yeah? Oh, before I go, listen. Kids shouldn't play at all. This alleged libation-infused amusement. Technically, they shouldn't be listening to the show anyway, right? There was just a warning about it. Kiddies, no drinky-winky, right? Right. So, otherwise, have fun, laugh, and, allegedly, drink, be merry, such and so forth. Do it all responsibly and all that. And there you have it. You've been notified and warned of anything alleged in this episode. Be smart about it. Lovely.
So here's a fun fact about Alfred Nobel. The man that invented dynamite got rich off of, blowing people up and stuff. Well, selling his invention that blew people up. Selling an explosive that would go on to blow people up. And other things, of course. It turns out that after a French newspaper accidentally published his obituary a little bit early than his death, they called him the Merchant of Death. So, instead of leaning back in his leather-clad office chair and pushing his sunglasses up on his nose there and grinning, he panicked instead. He rewrote his will and invented the most prestigious prize in human history. More or less, Alfred Nobel had one of history's most consequential midlife crises. No sports car, no girlfriend half his age, just science awards and things about peace. Now every year, a bunch of extremely serious Swedes sit in a very serious room in Stockholm and decide who has done the most to benefit mankind in the areas of physics, chemistry, medicine, literature, economics, and peace. And then they hand them a medal and a diploma and roughly $500,000 each, which, let's be honest, is the only part anyone actually cares about. We are going to talk about all of it. The prizes, mostly, some of the people, and unfortunately, maybe even the politics of it. I promise it's funny, like the time they gave one to a guy who was already dead. Twice. And somewhere in there, Alfred Nobel himself, a man who was equal parts genius, hypochondriac, devoted son, failed romantic, an accidental arms dealer. He was complicated and Swedish. And really, aren't we all? Okay, well, maybe not Swedish.
This is an Elton reads a book a week! Short-isode!
Welcome to Elton Reads a Book a Week, a podcast dedicated to the spreading of fun, informative podcasting, like infotainment gonorrhea, but for your ears, and with a lot less dripping. My name is Elton, and I read a book a week. And what a weird time it's been lately. I still haven't found a job, and I've noticed that I'm just getting sad. And in that sadness is fatness. So much eating. And so much reading. It's like the written word has become my food trigger. How am I going to segue my way out of this? Well, just like this, dear listener, with all that eating comes a lot of crapping. And it's on that porcelain seat of despair that I get a lot of reading done. It was that reading that inspired this episode. Who fucking nailed that segue? This fucking guy. Bam! I was reading a newly acquired bathroom reader and came upon the fact that the Nobel Prize has 6 categories. I never realized that because, well, until society takes a turn toward the intellectual and makes a reality show out of the Nobel Prize proceedings, it's just not going to be something I seek out. Yeah, I know. I'm disappointed in myself. But to be fair, I don't think the Nobel Prize reality drama would draw me in quite the same way as watching Brockmire, a show I just recently discovered and is really well done and delightful. Good one, Hank Azaria. I should have picked up on it sooner, but look, if you haven't seen it, you should definitely check it out. 4 seasons, 8 episodes a season, great show to binge. You know, it has an overarching. I'll go with arcing. It has a great storylines in it. You'll love it. As fun as watching physicists call each other bitches in 6 languages would be were it to be turned into a reality show, Jim Brockmire's drunken screeds are just too good to miss. Sorry, scientists. Learn to make a dildo joke and join the streaming rat race. So, what's with all this Nobel Prize and categories? Well, first, let's talk about Alfred Nobel, who I will be calling Freddie a lot. So, get comfortable with that. What's with Alfred, Freddie, Fred needing to give out all these hard-to-get prizes for smart people? Well, let's talk about him a little bit first. Alfred Bernard Nobel. He lived from 1833, my God, from 1833 to 1896. He stands among the most paradoxical of figures of the 19th century, a man whose inventions reshaped the destructive capacity of modern warfare and environmental destruction. He was born in Stockholm, Sweden on the 21st of October in 1833, the 4th of 8 children born to Emmanuel and Caroline. Andriette is her middle name. Fucking hell. Andriette is her maiden name. I'm pretty sure. Anyway, he was born to Emmanuel and Caroline Nobel. Only Alfred and 3 of his brothers survived to adulthood, namely because Alfred, in their youth, used to strap his explosive experiments to his siblings, and to everyone's chagrin, a lot of them worked. A disturbing amount of them worked. He was just disgustingly good at blowing things up. Normally, when a child blows up one of his siblings using various experimental means, that child is deemed a problem and is absconded to one of Sweden's many, many children's insane asylums. Oh, wait a minute. I hear what I know. I see you. You didn't know that Sweden has the world's leading amount of children with conduct disorder child onset type, severe, with limited prosocial emotions. Yeah. Children with all that. It was in all the newspapers. It was a big deal on everyone's For You page. I think Joe Rogan has it. The diagnosis. Sorry. That's a nonsensical tangent. I went on for far, far too long. I'll get back to the real information now. Please don't blow me up. Especially if any of you are Swedish. Freddie's father, Emanuel Nobel, was an engineer and inventor who built bridges and buildings in Stockholm and also experimented with techniques for blasting rock. For everyone listening at home, before Al Nobel's dynamite sticks of fun, if you wanted to explode some shit, you did it with gunpowder, which was usually mixed with saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal, or pure nitroglycerin, the pure stuff, both of which were less stable than your average manosphere influencer. Man, those guys are fragile little paper dolls, aren't they? Despite these ambitions of achieving explosive greatness, Emanuel's construction business suffered severely. Loss of building materials forced him into bankruptcy. The very year Freddie Fred Alfred was born. Alfred, for his part, was a sickly child, prone to illness throughout his youth, yet he enjoyed a close bond with his mother and exhibited a lively intellectual curiosity from an early age. In 1837, unable to support his family in Sweden, Emanuel Nobel departed for Finland and eventually St. Petersburg. I was going to say Florida. Went to the great state of Florida. No, he went to St. Petersburg, Russia, where he established a mechanical workshop that manufactured military equipment and convinced the Russian Tsar that naval mines could be used to protect the city against enemy ships. You know, if you have a heart for exploding things, sell it everywhere you can. The naval mines he designed were basically submerged wooden casks filled with gunpowder. They proved effective during the Crimean War, which ran from 1853 to 1856. And it deterred the British Royal Navy from advancing into firing range of St. Petersburg. Good for Papa Nobel. Because, who could blame the British Royal Navy, really? Unstable ship floating in water you're trying to traverse, no thank you. Having achieved industrial and business success, Emanuel was able, in 1842, to bring his family to St. Petersburg proper-ish, where his sons received a first-class private education in natural sciences, languages, and literature. Alfred Freddie, received no formal university education, yet his self-directed learning was extraordinarily comprehensive. He learned on the mean streets of Sweden, most notably Hammarö. I'm going to just do that a lot. Just get used to that, too. It's a town notably devoid of violence. Fred sought to change all that. He, as he would later proclaim himself to be, quote, the world's most Swedish of supervillains. He took it upon himself to determine that a town without death-dealing violent explosions is a town without a pulse, driven by the fear of dying. And really, isn't that kind of true? Nothing shakes things up, both literally and metaphorically, quite like a devastating ground-quaking explosion. Come on, am I right? You know it. Don't shake your head like that. You know it. Explosions are super rad. And of course, you know that all that I said about him wanting to blow up his town was bullshit. I'm just gonna, okay. I was just trying to not explode with boredom. Boom! Am I right? I don't know if that was a pun or pun adjacent. Either way, I'll move on. By the age of 17, Freddie Fred was fluent in Swedish, Russian, French, English, Norvakian, Denmarkian, Kevorkian, Romulan, and German. Those last few, except for German, were, of course, made up. For those playing at home, one was invented, one was a country, not a language, one was a euthanizing doctor, also not a language, and one was the language spoken by an alien race on Star Trek. I'll leave it to you to parse what was what. Okay. Alfred Nobel's primary interests ranged from English literature and poetry to chemistry and physics. He would later add Italian to his repertoire of spoken language things, becoming a remarkable polyglot who spoke at least 6 languages with ease. His father, who wanted his sons to become engineers rather than literary men, viewed Alfred's poetic inclinations with some impatience and arranged for him to travel abroad for further training in chemical engineering. During a formative 2-year period of European travel, Alfred visited Sweden, Germany, France, and the United States. In Paris, or Paris, to those not doing terrible accents, the city he came most to love. He loved Paris. He found a veritable smorgasbord of prostitutes for which he could contract multiple STDs, because oddly enough, he liked collecting STDs. He was often quoted as saying, quote, "My favorites are the drippy kind, but not the scabby kind." End quote. Then, he would toothily grin and slap his knee while laughing uproariously to the awkward, very uncomfortable silence of everyone nearby. Needless to say, he wasn't invited to many parties and was largely avoided in public. He was a weird guy, what can I say? I'm kidding, of course. That's ridiculous. He worked in the private laboratory of Professor T.J. Pelois, a distinguished chemist, and there encountered the young Italian chemist Ascanio Sobrero, who 3 years earlier, had discovered nitroglycerin, the drink of choice for high-class men of choice. No, it's not. It's not that. This highly explosive liquid, it is that, was at the time considered far too dangerous for practical application. Although its explosive power vastly exceeded that of gunpowder, it would detonate unpredictably when subjected to heat or pressure. But rather than leave well enough alone, these guys embraced the dark comedy that is the human race and forged ahead with building an implement of their own demise. God bless them. The encounter with not only the person who invented it, but nitroglycerin itself, planted the seed of an ambition that would define Nobel's career: to harness the substance's tremendous energy safely and usefully for industrial construction, and what he would later find out to be other applications. Oh, how naive, that simple, explosive, loving soul. After returning to St. Petersburg, I don't know what that was, in 1852 to join the booming family enterprise of exploding things for money. Get it? The booming enterprise. During the Crimean War, Fred, and his father conducted joint experiments to develop nitroglycerin as a commercially viable explosive. At the end of the war, however, it destroyed demand for military equipment, and the Nobel family enterprise collapsed once again into bankruptcy. Freddie returned with his parents to Stockholm, where he set up a small laboratory to continue his explosive research. The dangers of this work were catastrophic and immediate. In September 1864, a devastating explosion at the Nobel family laboratory near Stockholm killed Alfredo's younger brother Emil and 4 other people. And the insensitive sibling killer joke comes back around to grab reality by the junk and start hugging, doesn't it? Who's laughing now, pearl clutchers? I don't even know who or what that was directed at, to be honest. The Stockholm authorities subsequently banned all experimentation with nitroglycerin within city limits. Goodness. Because, too much mop up. Am I right? Shit gets messy. This forced Alfred to move his work to a large barge anchored on Lake Mälaren because A, less people killing in open water, and B, good eats for when things go wrong and you kill all the fish. Win, goddamn win, people. Far from deterring him, his reduced to smithereens brother galvanized his resolve. His brother's explosion would not be in vain. In the pursuit of finding better ways to explode things, damn it. By 1864, he had managed to begin mass production of nitroglycerin. Glycerin. Fucking nitroglycerin. And it paired well with a detonator he had already invented. Initially, it was a wooden plug inserted into a metal container of nitroglycerin, whose small charge of black powder would ignite the larger explosive mass, which marked the beginning of his reputation as an inventor. As a tribute, that history would later judge to be a little heartless and tone-deaf. Freddie shaped the detonator to look like his brother in his coffin. Kind of fucked up, Fred. Seriously, man. I'm kidding, obviously. But can we talk for a minute? How twisted is it that my brain went right for that? Not even kidding. No delay. Just body-shaped wooden box with a big T-shaped plunger thing sticking out of it, all painted red, like in a cartoon. That's my brain. Join my Patreon for $4 a month. You get extra podcasts, alternative art for the episodes, as well as early and ad-free. You get the episodes. But most of all, you'll be helping me, helping me get some much-needed therapy, which I am in desperate need of, right? For real. Did you hear a fucking box that looks like a coffin with a body in it? And then a big metal plunger. And the bodies of his brother who died in an explosion. For real. Wow. Help me get therapy. Okay. Alfredo Nobelino, Alfred Nobel, refined this whole thing into the mercury fulminate. Fuck this word. Fulminate. Okay, I'm going with that. He refined all this into the mercury fulminate blasting cap, which could be triggered by either shock or moderate heat, and which inaugurated the modern era of high explosives that were not shaped like his brother. The crowning invention came in 1867, experimenting with different additives to stabilize nitroglycerin. Nobel discovered that mixing the liquid with kieselguhr, a porous clay-like diatomaceous earth, or ert, if you're from Sweden, which I don't think they talk that way, but I did it. Like the clay-like diatomaceous earth absorbed the nitroglycerin into dryness, converting an ordinarily dangerous material into a manageable paste that could be shaped into rods and inserted into drilling holes. He named this compound dynamite, after the Greek word for power, dunamis, and the catchphrase of JJ from Good Times. And then he patented it in Great Britain in 1867 and in the United States in 1868. The invention immediately transformed construction on a global scale, blasting tunnels through mountains for railways, digging canals, clearing navigation barriers from rivers. Feats of engineering previously unimaginable now became routine, and the bodies started to pile up. Yeah. Nobel continued to develop his explosive technology through the 70s and the 80s, 1870s and 80s, but the 70s and 80s anyway. I imagine there was some like rudimentary disco balls made out of really high polished metal, and then like beat together like made out of old plows and like axe heads. And they just swung those around from the top of barns, and lanterns had like, they put like red, I don't know, sheets or glass on them. And then they had a guy that twirled them around. And then the 80s, they had things that sounded like laser beams. They would thump wires and be like, pew, pew. I don't know what I'm doing. In 1875, he invented blasting gelatin, a more powerful form of dynamite produced by mixing nitroglycerin with nitrocellulose, which was used to make coatings on guitars, back in the 50s, nitrocellulose. Anyway, this resulted that this combination of nitroglycerin and nitrocellulose resulted in a tough, water-resistant material with superior blasting power. In 1887, he introduced balsatite, one of the first nitroglycerin smokeless powders, and a precursor of modern cordite. Over his lifetime, he would hold 355 patents across 5 countries, covering not only explosive but also materials such as synthetic rubber, artificial silk, and leather. He established factories and laboratories in approximately 90 locations across more than 20 countries and built a global network of corporations to produce and market his products. And his products would eventually spread body parts far and wide in and around those locations, I'm sure. I'm kidding. Maybe. Victor Hugo famously described Alfred Nobel as Europe's richest vagabond, a characterization that captured both his relentless his restless itinerancy, that makes sense, and his extraordinary wealth. Despite his public stature, Alfred Nobel remained a deeply private and often melancholic individual. He never married, and anyone he ever dated either blew up or gave them an STD. So, he's a very strange and very unpopular fellow, like I said before. Though he was capable of being charming over dinner and during dinner conversation, he had an incisive wit, and if he couldn't, win anyone over, he just bombed the place. I mean, who better to do it, right? Be my friend, or I'll level this building. Be my friend. Such is the plight of the lonely Swede. All in all, he was fundamentally a recluse, prone to fits of depression and mass killing with explosive experimentation when the mood struck him. He had a deep and enduring love of literature, writing poetry, plays, and novels, almost all of which remained unpublished, and all of which ended, weirdly enough, with either a character or a setting exploding. He was also a voracious reader who kept in his personal library works by Victor Hugo, and other authors known for themes of idealism and social compassion and wanting to blow things up. Mostly figurative and using poetic license, but if you can't figure out which parts I've been adding and fucking being an idiot about, I'm sorry. It's going to be a rough time at the office when you try and explain Alfred Nobel bombing dinner parties to make friends. Nobel's romantic life was limited, but not entirely absent. His most significant attachment was to Sophie Hess, an Austrian woman 23 years his junior, whom he met in 1876. Though the relationship was turbulent and ultimately unfulfilling, not enough detonations, apparently. Of greater intellectual and personal significance was his friendship with Bertha Kinsky, later the Baroness von Suttner. She had responded to an advertisement Nobel placed in a Viennese newspaper. I wanted to say Vietnamese so bad, but this was a newspaper in Vienna, Austria. Viennese. He placed an ad in a Vietnamese newspaper for a Viennese newspaper for a secretary and housekeeper. So he traveled to Paris for the interview and deeply impressed him with her intellect and views on world affairs. She was also the only person who could read his poetry without either laughing out loud or cringing out loud. So bonus, right? Bertha soon departed to marry elsewhere, but she and Nobel maintained a correspondence for decades. She became one of the most prominent voices of the European peace movement, publishing the influential anti-war novel Lay Down Your Arms, and almost certainly influenced Nobel's eventual decision to include a peace prize among his bequests. In 1905, 9 years after Nobel's death, Bertha von Suttner was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, becoming the second female Nobel laureate after Marie Curie. Nobel's personality was a study in contradiction. He was in many respects a pacifist who just wanted to see things suddenly fly apart due to a rapid sudden release of massive amounts of energy within a confined space, and believed that the destruction power of his inventions might ultimately render war unthinkable, because, nothing ends war like killing everyone in a massive explosion. That's just how it works, right? Yet he built factories supplying the armed forces for multiple nations. He held what contemporaries regarded as radical social views and had a reputation among some as a liberal or even a socialist. Ooh. Yet he distrusted democracy and opposed women's suffrage. He was a philanthropist of genuine conviction who was also, by any measure, one of the most consequential arms merchants of the 19th century. The moment that appears to have most profoundly redirected Alfred Nobel's thinking about his legacy occurred in 1888, when his brother Ludwig died in Cannes, France, the place of the famous Cannes Film Festival. Cannes Film Festival, you get it. Ludwig died in Cannes, France. A Parisian newspaper confused the two men and published what was in effect Freddie Nobel's premature obituary, bearing the damning headline, Le Marchand de la Morte est mort. The merchant of death is dead. The obituary characterized Nobel as a man who became rich by finding ways to kill more people faster than ever before, a formulation that starkly exposed how history was likely to remember him. Spoiler alert! It's one of the two reasons people remember him. The experience of reading one's own obituary and finding it so uncharitable appears to have been a catalyst for deep reflection for Nobel. I mean, how would you feel? You're mourning your brother's death, first of all, and the newspaper completely fucks up the obituary posts. So, there's going to be phone calls, and it turns out the world thinks you're a complete piece of shit death profiteering turd. If that's not a time for a little deep self-reflection, what time is? I mean, I would say after the phone call about the fucked up obituary, but still. Yeah, hello. Hi, this is Alfred Nobel. It seems you not only fucked up the public announcement of my dearly departed brother's death, but you printed mine instead. An obituary, by the way, paints me, that paints me as the angel of death. What in the fuck, French newspaper? Seriously? Pardonnez-moi, monsieur. You are very, very correct. The only excuse I can offer is that we are French, and we were born not giving a merde. Merde means shit for you non-French-speaking types. Nobel was unmarried, had no children, and had spent his life in perpetual motion across the capitals and factory towns of Europe, probably shopping around for hookers to help him explore his explosion fetish. Ma'am, you seem to be experienced in the ways of love. Might I engage you in your expertise in aiding me to find my a more enlightened position regarding my particular sexual peccadillos? What I mean to say is that, well, so far I've been told my peccadillos sexually are very odd, and no one seems to want to help me explore the frisky feelings. Oh, fine, I'll just come out with it. Ma'am, I'd like to, explode inside you, so to speak, but not sexually. Unfortunately, for the world, he got a lot of no-takers. Long story short, that's why we have the Nobel Prizes. You're welcome. Good night. I'm kidding about the hookers. Though, only maybe. You can't prove it didn't happen. No, you can't. Nobel's fortune was enormous, but to what purpose would it ultimately be put? Nobel came to regard his explosions not as instrument of sex or war in and of themselves, but as contributions to industry and progress and sex. No, not sex. And he was disturbed to see them turned consistently towards destruction and not sex. I mean, yeah, not sex. He was disturbed to see them turn toward destruction and fun and a way to make fishing easier. I mean, if you know, you know. These concerns, combined with his long-standing intellectual interests in science, literature, and peace, and with the influence of Bertha von Suttner's pacifism, gradually crystallized into a plan of extraordinary ambition and self-aggrandizing. On the 27th of November, 1895, just over a year before his death, Al Nobel signed his final will and testament in Paris, quietly depositing it in a bank in Stockholm. The document was handwritten and brief, little more than a single page. Yet it was among the most consequential private legal instruments of the modern era. In its key passage, Nobel directed that the whole of my remaining realizable estate shall be dealt with in the following way. The capital invested in safe securities by my executors shall constitute a fund, the interest on which shall be annually distributed in the form of prizes to those who complete my challenges 3. The first challenge being the breath of God. Only the penitent man shall pass. The second challenge, the word of God. Only in the footsteps of God will he proceed. And finally, the third, the path of God. Only in the leap from the lion's head will he prove his worth. Should anyone best my challenges 3, they shall win the greatest prize a dynamite guy who happened to invent dynamite could ever bestow on them. Money. God bless you, and let the games begin if you dare. Love, Freddie. Totally not a merchant of debt, Nobel. Okay, here's what he really wrote. The whole of my remaining realizable estate shall be dealt with in the following way. The capital invested in a safe securities by my in safe securities by my executors shall constitute a fund, the interest on which shall be annually distributed in the form of prizes to those who, during the preceding year, shall have conferred the greatest benefit on mankind. The said interest shall be divided into 5 equal parts, which shall be apportioned as follows: 1 part to the person who shall have made the most important discovery or invention in the field of physics, 1 part to the person who shall have made the most important chemical discovery or improvement, 1 part to the person who shall have made the most important discovery within the domain of physiology or medicine, 1 part to the person who shall have produced in the field of literature the most outstanding work of an idealistic tendency, and 1 part to the person who shall have done the most or best work for fraternity between nations, for the abolition or reducing of standing armies, and for the holding and promotion of peace congresses. Nobel specifically specified that the prizes for physics and chemistry should be awarded by the Swedish Academy of Sciences, the prize for physiology or medicine by the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, the prize for literature by the Swedish Academy, and the Peace Prize by a committee of 5 kindergartners who cannot be bribed with either sweets, soft squishy toys, or the liberal use of dynamite. Didn't buy that last bit, did you? You're catching on. Damn it. Okay. He said the Peace Prize would be voted on by a committee of persons selected by the Norwegian Storting, or the parliament in Norway. The Storting is the supreme legislature, as I said, of Norway, established in 1814 by the Constitution of Norway. It is located in Oslo. His explicit instruction that awards be made with no consideration of nationality, that the most worthy shall receive the prize, whether he be Scandinavian or not, made the Nobel Prize the first truly international prize of its kind, established at a moment when European nationalism was intensifyingly dangerous. It was intensifying dangerously, is what I meant to say, but you get it. Kind of like intensifying the way it is now. In the U.S., Alfred Nobel died of a cerebral hemorrhage at his villa in San Romeo, Italy. Nope, not Romeo, idiot. At his villa in San Remo, Italy, on the 10th of December, 1896, a date that has ever since been commemorated as the annual day of the Nobel Prize award ceremonies, which is fucking weird, I think, because you'd think they would go on for his birthday and not celebrate his death. But what do I know? I'm not Swedish. Maybe death days are cooler than birthdays in Sweden. Who knows? I'm not looking it up. When his will was opened, the contents shocked his family, friends, and the public alike. A slew of various dick pics poured out that compared his junk to sticks of dynamite. Just poured out of the file. Gross. I'm kidding. Though it would have made for one hell of a will reading had that happened, don't you think? People feigning, people intrigued, and probably a few of those pics might have been pocketed. You know what I mean? You know, somebody would have. Anyway, the road from the moment Nobel's will was read out to the first Nobel Prize ceremony was neither smooth nor swift. Neither Rico Suave nor Taylor Swift, as it were. The executors of the will were 2 young engineers. A guy with an awesome name, Ragnar Solman. Sounds like he should be in a video game or something. Ragnar Solman. Who had, he had worked as Nobel's personal assistant at his Karlskoga laboratory. And Rudolf Lilljequist, 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 It doesn't matter. A Swedish industrialist. They faced formidable obstacles because, well, one was an engineer and one was a fucking industrialist. I mean, setting up an international prize apparatus using money from a deceased person's estate, probably not in the curriculum for either an industrialist or a fucking engineer. But whatever. Nobel's family was also kind of a problem, particularly his nephews, or his uncle's his nephews, through his brothers, Robert and Ludwig. They were another problem. They initially considered contesting the will because family gonna do what family gonna do. In their defense, at the time of Freddie's death, his estate amounted to approximately 31 million Swedish kroner, equivalent to roughly 9 million United States dollars at the time, or close to $300 million today, adjusted for inflation. Who knew you could get so much cash blowing up people and merchanting death? Am I right? Luckily, the nephews came up with an elegant and pretty simple solution. A battle to the death, using explosions. They limited their available firepower to only sticks of dynamite and matches. Choosing an open plot of land in a rural part of Sweden, they set about determining who would be the victor and sole inheritor by who could live, or who would be the last person alive. The lawyers assigned to execute the will, the estate of Nobel, protested, but to no avail. They kept saying this has no bearing on what you get from the will. So regardless, on a sullen Wednesday afternoon, Nobel's nephews set about lobbing sticks of dynamite at each other. The lawyers were confounded and yet they were told to be in attendance to quote unquote witness, which they didn't understand. And again, they repeated, this will not change your inheritance. And the nephews just told them to act as an unbiased party, again dismissing their protests. And one more time, they vehemently protested, stating in no uncertain terms that the result of what happens today wouldn't change what's in the will. The nephews continued unabated. Unfortunately, the agreement to limit the amount of nitroglycerin used in the dynamite that they brought was seemingly overlooked. So, of course, they all brought the maximum available amount of nitroglycerin dynamite that was available at the time. After a deadly and completely devastating 3 minutes that could be seen from miles away, none of Alfred Nobel's nephews survived to get anything anyway. Later, the lawyers told a Swedish newspaper at the time, "We told them so many times that the will could only be contested in a court of law. And no time did we suggest any resolution employing explosives of any kind." What resulted today was a tragedy of ignorance and just blunt force stupidity. They simply took it upon themselves to determine that it was a winner-take-all situation, despite our many, 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 many attempts to rectify their misunderstanding. One onlooker to the event, who was nearby, just happened to be nearby, was quoted as saying, "I thought they were plenty stupid before it all started blowing up. Then the blowing up confirmed it. You don't see that every day." And yeah, sorry about that. Just the idea of his nephews battling it out for an inheritance using dynamite that they would never get anyway. It was too hard for me to resist. I'll move on. No. Instead, the situation was partly resolved with one nephew mediating between the executors and the family that expected to inherit a significant share of the estate, and it all worked out between them. They figured it all out. His companion, Sophie Hess, further complicated matters by claiming the status of common law wife and demanding inclusion in the bequest and entitled to a larger share because, they were married-ish. And she ultimately settled with just a lifetime allowance, as one does, plus a separate dispute on top of all that arose over national jurisdiction. Nobel had left Sweden as a child and had lived for decades in France. He was not clearly a citizen of any nation. Both France and Sweden sought authority over the settlement of his estate. The resolution came through an arcane aspect of French legal custom. A man's residence was determined by where he kept his carriage horses. And frankly, I think that's the only way it could have been settled. Home is where the carriage horses are, as the old proverb says. And really, how can anyone disagree with that? I mean, there are horses involved, people. Horses! We are not monsters here. Since Nobel had moved his horses to Sweden before his death, like a fucking boss, he was declared a Swedish resident, and the small court of Karlskoga, I'm just going with that, the Swedish town where Nobel had maintained his final home and, I guess, his horses, was designated to interpret and administer his will. There are two institutions charged with selecting Science Prize recipients, the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences and the Karolinska Institutet, also initially resisted, requesting that a portion of the bequest fund research institutes and cover their administrative costs. Because they ain't about to do this shit for free. These demands were eventually accommodated. The Swedish King Oscar II, who had been affronted by Nobel's decision to assign the Peace Prize to the Norwegian Storting at a time when Norway was agitating for independence from Sweden. How dare they want to do things on their own? And ultimately he gave his assent on June 29, 1900. And the Nobel Foundation was formally established. Nobel's decision that Norway administer the Peace Prize was seen by the Swedish royal family as a political gesture of support for Norwegian independence. How dare they? A controversy that came close to derailing the entire enterprise. After 5 years of legal negotiations, institutional deliberations, administrative organization, numerous combat scenarios using dynamite, thumb wrestling, and a poorly conceived amateur synchronized swimming / speed baking competition, which, in my opinion, was the greatest loss to the world. The Nobel Foundation was formally in place, and the first Nobel Prizes were awarded on December 10th, 1901, the 5th anniversary of Alfred Nobel's death. The prize in each field amounted to roughly 150,000 Swedish kroner, approximately 15 times the annual salary, of a Swedish professor at the time, making it an extraordinary financial award as well as an honor. The internationalist principles embedded in Nobel's will, rewarding achievement regardless of nationality and all that, immediately distinguished the prizes from all existing national awards. The selection committee, did not wait long before demonstrating the global scope of the prize's ambitions. Only 2 years after the prizes were inaugurated, Marie Curie shared the 1903 Nobel Prize in Physics for her role in the discovery of radioactivity, which she would later die from. And in 1911, she received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, unshared, for her discovery of radioactive elements, polonium and radium, making her the first person ever to receive 2 Nobel Prizes. The prizes quickly established themselves as the supreme distinctions in their respective fields. In 1968, the Swedish Riksbank commemorated its 300th anniversary by establishing a prize in economic sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel, officially named the Sveriges Riksbank Prize in Economic Sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel. The award was established via a large donation to the Nobel Foundation, but it's often referred to simply and informally as the Nobel Prize in Economics, the first award being made in 1969. Though this prize is not provided for in Nobel's will and has occasionally attracted criticism as an intrusion upon his intentions, it has widely become accepted as a de facto 6th Nobel Prize. Alfred Nobel remains one of history's most compelling paradoxes. He was a man who revolutionized the technology of destruction, yet dreamed of a disarmed world, weirdly enough, who invented the instruments of industrial-scale warfare, yet funded the world's most prestigious peace prize. He spent his life in lonely, driven isolation, yet crafted a philanthropic bequest of global and enduring consequence. His personal library, stocked with Tolstoy, Hugo, Shelley, a preposterous amount of explosion-related pornography, picture albums filled with his dick next to sticks of dynamite, and books by the great Enlightenment philosophers, speaks to the seriousness with which he engaged questions of human progress, justice, and civilization. His friendship with Bertha von Suttner and his visceral reaction to the Merchant of Death obituary reveal a man who was deeply troubled by the gap between his contributions to science and industry and his love of exploding things, and the uses to which those contributions had been put. Nobel's final will may be understood as his attempt to close that gap, to redirect the fruits of his fortune that violent detonations brought him toward the advancement of human knowledge, culture, and peace. You know, as one assessment concludes, quote, "The will prescribes the grand design, principles, and criteria for what is probably the greatest of all his inventions. Dynamite." No, shit. I meant the prize that carries his name. May I start over, please? End quote. That prize, awarded annually for over a century, has come to shape the contours of global intellectual life, directing public attention and scientific resources toward the discoveries and voices that promise the greatest benefit to mankind. Precisely the ambition that Nobel, in a single handwritten page, bequeathed to the world, or some shit like that. Alfred Nobel's life, it's like an arc from poverty and displacement to scientific blowing up folk genius, industrial empire to killing large amounts of folks with explosions, and ultimately a form of institutional immortality with cash prizes. What a weird fucking life. And the Nobel prizes came out of a deep personal reckoning with the consequences of his work, a guilt-fueled confrontation with mortality, reputation, and responsibility that led him to stake his fortune on the behalf that human achievement in science, literature, and peace deserve the highest recognition the world could offer. A prize in his name. Because nothing saves face like giving cash out to those who did something awesome for humanity. Ball spiked. Long after those initial first prizes were awarded, that wager has more than justified itself. Sort of. I mean, dynamite still blows people up, but he did manage to distance his name from the carnage a great deal. So kudos. The name of Alfred Nobel endures not as the Merchant of Death that one careless but subjectively accurate Paris newspaper announced, but as the patron of humanity's most celebrated intellectual and moral achievements. How's that for a PR cleanup job? Yes! A nifty trick that countless gajillionaires have been trying to replicate ever since. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, anybody? Hello? This aggrandizing PR fix, of course, isn't an abstract concept, of course. It is codified within the specific rules and categories laid out in his 1995. That would be crazy. In his 1895 will. The Nobel Prize encompasses 6 recognized categories, as I said earlier, 5 of which were established directly by Alfred Nobel's will, and 1 posthumously by that fucking bank. The self-promoting Swedish bank. The selection of those original 5 were deeply personal, shaped by Nobel's professional experience, literary passions, romantic friendships, and troubled public image. And every stage of the process, from the drafting of the will to the announcement of laureates, on its face, seemingly innocent. But, as with all things that have ever been voted on, they've generated some controversy. The choice of Disciplines reflects Nobel's personal biography with unusual directness. It's kind of all about him. Though chemistry and physics were his lifelong scientific interest and the basis for his inventions, he tutored in chemistry as a teenager in St. Petersburg and held 355 patents. His most related to industrial chemistry. His invention of dynamite directly and the blasting gelatin drew on both disciplines and generated the fortune that funded the prizes. So why not pay tribute, right? Give it up for dynamite. Physiology or medicine entered the will in part because Nobel was personally afflicted by cardiovascular disease and was treated with nitroglycerin, the very compound at the heart of his industrial empire, creating a poignant irony he acknowledged in letters to friends. As it turns out, workers in his factories who inhaled nitroglycerin fumes experienced headaches during the week, but relief from angina and heart difficulty. An observation that eventually led to the development of nitroglycerin tablets as a cardiac medicine. The literature reflected Nobel's deep investment in the written word. He was fluent in 6 languages, and I mentioned this before, I think, but I'll remind you, he kept a library of approximately 1,500 volumes. 1,500 volumes in San Remo. I messed that up again. 1,500 volumes in San Remo, Italy, when he died. He had himself written poetry, drafted novels, and completed at least one play. He mingled with Parisian literary salons and had a close personal relationship with Victor Hugo. And no dick pic albums. And no explosion porn that I know of. But you can't prove there wasn't any. Or, I mean, you would be able... Whatever. Sorry, folks. I made it up. The Peace Prize almost certainly arose from Nobel's long friendship with Countess Bertha Kinsky, who later became the Baroness von Suttner and one of Europe's foremost peace advocates. She pressed Nobel repeatedly to use his wealth to advance peaceful relations among European nations. And this correspondence is widely considered decisive in his decision to include the prize. Nobel himself was paradoxically skeptical that peace could be achieved through diplomacy. He believed powerful weaponry might instead deter war. The guy that invented dynamite thought that things like dynamite would stop wars. So making the Peace Prize was an act of self-contradiction as much as philanthropy. I mean, for real, what else would you expect from the guy who invented dynamite? A solution that didn't involve dynamite? Please. Nobel wrote 3 separate wills over his lifetime. The first left his fortune primarily to his family members, loyal servants, friends, and a former companion, Sophie Hess. We talked about that. Remember? And it all ended in a dynamite battle, killing all his nephews. Remember? I was joking, of course, but still. In 1893, a second will introduced the idea of prize giving for the first time, specifically naming a fund for physiological and medical research to be administered by the Karolinska Institutet every 3 years, and designated funds to the Austrian Society of Friends of Peace, my goodness, an organization founded by Bertha von Suttner, that money-grubbing peace lover. The final and definitive will was executed on November 27, 1895, consolidating and formalizing all 5 prizes. In addition to all the family, mistress, and tax mess, Nobel's decision to give the Peace Prize to Norway and not Sweden was a diplomatic nipple twist. At the time of Nobel's death, Norway and Sweden were bound together in a fragile union under the Swedish crown. Like I mentioned before, Norway was agitating for peace. How dare they? The Swedish king interpreted that Nobel's placement of the Peace Prize, my God, that's a lot of peas, in Norwegian Storting was a fuck you to him. And Swedes everywhere. You know. Anyway, he briefly considered refusing to host the prizes at all. And then the Norwegian-Swedish Union was dissolved in 1905. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. It was just for 4 years after the prizes began. partly vindicating the political anxiety the will had provoked. It also irritated the king that Nobel's will explicitly directed that prizes be awarded to the most worthy candidates regardless of nationality, rather than being confined to Swedes, because everyone knows that only the Swedish people make the world better. Only Sweden. It took 5 full years for all of these disputes to be settled and all that, and the first prizes to be awarded. In 1901. So 1905 it dissolved. I hope they've found peace since then. I don't know why I said that. The Nobel Foundation introduced rules, not specified in Nobel's will, that have themselves generated persistent controversy. Chief among these is the rule that no more than 3 individuals may share a single prize in any given year, and that the prize may not be awarded posthumously, as science oh my God! As science has increasingly become a collaborative, large team enterprise, the 3-person cap has repeatedly forced selection committees to make politically fraught choices about whose contributions are credited. The Nobel Committee also systematically deviated from Nobel's stated intention that prizes recognize achievements during the preceding year, instead awarding prizes for discoveries made decades earlier, sometimes with problematic results, as when a scientist central to a discovery died before recognition could be granted. The selection committee themselves have historically lacked diversity. The committees that nominate and vote on laureates are determined by a small, self-perpetuating group of Swedish academics. More women have been added to the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences in recent years, but research suggests that increasing female representation on nominating bodies has not significantly improved the rate at which women are selected. Weird, but because women do not disproportionately nominate other women. Okay. Albert Einstein, a previous subject of this here podcast, the first episode, which you will not find online, but is in Patreon, in the Patreon, and it's there. Albert Einstein is perhaps the most glaring example. Despite being the world's most celebrated theoretical physicist by the early 1920s and being nominated repeatedly for the theory of relativity, the Nobel Committee explicitly refused to award him for that work. He was eventually given the 1921 prize, announced in 1922, for the photoelectric effect, a significant but comparatively narrower contribution, and the committee's citation explicitly excluded relativity. Swedish committee member Alvar Gullstrand reportedly wrote in his private diary that Einstein must never receive the Nobel Prize, even if the whole world demands it, without providing any scientific rationale for why. Historians suggest the committee was biased toward experimental over theoretical physics. You know how that goes. Fucking A. Was biased toward experimental over theoretical physics and possibly towards Gullstrand's personal antipathy. Rosalind Franklin's exclusion for the 1962 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for the discovery of DNA's structure is one of the most discussed injustices in prize history. Franklin's X-ray crystallographic images, most famously Photo 51, were shared with James Watson without her knowledge or consent by her colleague Maurice Wilkins. Providing Watkins, Franklin's X-ray crystallographic images, most famously Photo 51, were shared with James Watson without her knowledge or consent by her colleague Maurice Wilkins. providing Watson with the crucial insight that DNA was a double helix. The prize went to Watson, Crick, and Wilkins. Franklin had died of ovarian cancer in 1958 and was therefore ineligible under the no posthumous award rule, but she had never even been nominated during her lifetime. Many scholars cite both the posthumous rule and entrenched institutional misogyny as contributing factors. Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison reportedly were nearly named joint recipients of the 1912 Physics Prize, but a personal dispute between them, with Tesla allegedly refusing to share an award with Edison because fuck that patent-stealing prick. That led the committee to bypass both and instead award the prize to Niels Dahlen for an automatic lighthouse valve. What? A choice widely considered to be of far lesser scientific magnitude. Yeah, I could fucking see that. Leo Tolstoy was never awarded the literary Leo Tolstoy was never awarded the Literature Prize, despite 5 nominations and the initial failure to honor him in 1901. And that drew a letter of protest from leading writers of the era: Chekhov, Proust, Joyce, Ibsen, and Mark Twain. They all also died without recognition. Still, Nobel's instruction that literature be of an idealistic tendency is thought to have guided and sometimes distorted early selections in ways that excluded some of the most consequential authors in favor of writers who have since passed into obscurity. Mahatma Gandhi was nominated for the Peace Prize a few times, 5 times between 1937 and 1948, and was apparently being considered for the 1948 prize when he was assassinated. No prize was awarded that year, and the committee's statement that there was no suitable, quote, living candidate, unquote, was interpreted by many as a veiled acknowledgement of his intended selection. When the Dalai Lama received the prize in 1989, the committee chairman explicitly stated it was in part a tribute to the memory of Mahatma Gandhi. Jonas Salk, the polio guy whose polio vaccine was tested in 1.8 million children, is one. Jonas Salk, whose polio vaccine was tested in 1.8 million children in one of the largest clinical tests in history and announced as a triumph in 1955, was never awarded the prize, despite embodying Nobel's stated criterion of conferring the greatest benefit on mankind. Committee members argued his vaccine was, ready for this, merely a technical achievement. Jesus fucking Christ. A judgment widely regarded as elitist and inconsistent, given that the same year's prize in physiology and medicine recognized cardiac catheterization, also a technical procedure. Fucking A. Now, here are some errors. Those are always good, right? In the 1926 Nobel Prize in physiology, the 1926 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine was awarded to Johannes Fibiger for claiming that a worm larva caused gastric cancer in rats. Research that was subsequently proven incorrect, as the lesions identified were hyperplastic rather than neoplastic. An unsuccessful effort was later made to have the prize rescinded, establishing one of the few cases where the committee made an outright scientific error rather than merely an omission. In 1949, the prize the 1949 prize that was given to Antonio Igas Moniz for the prefrontal lobotomy procedure was also condemned. The procedure was subsequently recognized as dangerous. Turns out that cutting parts of the brain out, probably not good. Not great. And frequently caused devastating personality deterioration in the patients. And attempts were made to have the award formally rescinded. That was the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine. Or medicine. Fucking, what is my tongue doing? Maybe I need a lobotomy. Might help. Before things turn even more serious, just real quick, let's talk about dead people. Mainly 2 people awarded the Nobel Prize while being dead. The first being Eric Axel Karlfeldt in 1931 Literature Prize. He got the literature Nobel Prize for Literature. The Swedish poet and permanent secretary of the Swedish Academy is the only person to have been awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature posthumously. Breaking the law. Karlfeldt had actually been awarded the award a decade earlier, but refused it to avoid any conflicts of interest, my God, regarding his position on the Academy. After his death in April 1931, the committee decided to honor his poetry with the prize. Oh, breaking the law. Then Dag Hammarskjöld, 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 Hammarskjöld. I'm going Dag Hammarskjöld. 1961 Peace Prize. The UN Secretary General was killed in a plane crash in September 1961 while negotiating peace in the Congo. Just months later, the Norwegian Nobel Committee posthumously awarded him the Peace Prize for his monumental work in developing the United Nations into a highly effective international organization. Kudos to him. Luckily, I suppose they recognized a trend in people getting less than living before they could get their prize. So eventually they made the Nobel Prize Committee, I guess, they made a rule change in 1974 to make a special exception for those that die in the loophole. You know, now you can die before being awarded the prize and still get the prize, as long as you were nominated first. Lucky bastards. Now this is going to get a good deal shitty and gross. I apologize, but fuck this next guy. In 2018, the institution responsible for selecting the Nobel Prize in Literature, the Swedish Academy, was engulfed in its own institutional scandal when allegations of sexual misconduct and rape were leveled against Jean-Claude Arnault, a cultural figure closely connected to the Academy. Allegations by 18 women assaulting allegations by 18 women accusing Arnault of assault, who describes himself as a photographer. Arnault does. They accused him of rape, sexual harassment, physical abuse, and harassment over a period of more than 20 years in Sweden and France. Globe-trotting asshole. 8 women filed formal complaints. 8 women filed formal complaints, but all bar one of the cases were subsequently dropped for lack of evidence or because they had exceeded the statute of limitations. After a trial held behind closed doors, the public prosecutor, Christina Voigt, had called for the Frenchman to be sentenced to at least 3 years in jail. The maximum sentence for rape in Sweden is 6 years. In a unanimous verdict, Stockholm District Court sentenced Arnault, the husband of a member of the Swedish Academy, which awards the prestigious literary prize. They sentenced him to 2 years in prison. The minimum sentence. Gross. The judge, Gudrun Antemar, said there was sufficient evidence. The judge, Gudrun Antemar, said there was sufficient evidence consisting mainly of statements during the trial by the injured party and several witnesses to convict the defendant of one of the 2 counts of rape with which he had been charged. The verdict came at the start of Nobel Prize week, shortly before the award for medicine was announced. Oof. Yikes. Fucking The handling of these allegations led to a string of board member resignations and an internal governance crisis. As a direct consequence, the Swedish Academy announced it would not award the 2018 Nobel Prize in Literature, an extremely rare occurrence, making only the second time since World War II that the Literature Prize was withheld. Both the 1988 and Goodness gracious. Both the 2018 and 2019 prizes were ultimately announced together in October 2019. Gross. Ugh. Fucking douchebags. The Economics Prize has faced persistent criticism from within the Nobel family itself. Nobel's descendants have publicly stated that the Bank of Sweden created Economics Prize should not be described as the Nobel Prize, since it was not part of Alfred Nobel's will and represents an intrusion into his legacy. Peter Nobel, a great-grandnephew of Alfred, has stated that his ancestor never intended to include economics, which Nobel might have associated with the businessmen and industrialists he saw as exploiting workers, not exploding them like he liked. Among the other prize disciplines, the Nobel Foundation has largely accepted the prize and integrates its laureates into the annual ceremony, but the controversy over its legitimacy persists. Gender bias is among the most persistent cultural criticisms, though. As of recent counts, fewer than 10% of Nobel laureates in the scientific categories have been women. Despite women's growing representation in research, only 16 women have received the prize specifically for scientific research contributions, compared with 30 in literature, peace, and economics. The gap between women's share of scientific output and their share of Nobel Prizes has not narrowed commensurately over the past century. Western and geographic biases is also documented. Nearly all laureates in the scientific categories have carried out their work in Europe or North America, a pattern that does not reflect the global distribution of scientific activity. The prize awarding institutions are all Swedish or Norwegian, and critics argue this embeds a structural Eurocentric perspective into selection decisions, and I agree with that. Also, the three-person cap has become a problem, and it has become increasingly untenable in an era of large collaborative science. Projects like the Event Horizon Telescope, which connected 8 radio telescopes across the globe and captured the first direct image of a black hole, involved hundreds of scientists, and they cannot be accommodated within the three-person prize structure, raising fundamental questions about whether the Nobel model remains appropriate for 21st century science. Missing categories also represent another enduring critique. Mathematics has no Nobel Prize. You know how much I love the math stuff. The absence is often attributed to Nobel's personal disinterest in the field, though the popular claim that he excluded mathematics due to a rivalry over a woman has no credible historical foundation. The Abel Prize was established in 2002 by the Norwegian government as a mathematical equivalent of the Nobel, but it has not achieved the same cultural reach. Modern fields such as artificial intelligence, climate science, computer science, and the social sciences remain entirely outside the prize structure, a limitation bound by the inflexibility of Nobel's 1895 will. The Nobel Foundation itself, through former President Arne, Tiselius, Arne Tiselius has acknowledged the impossibility of perfect fairness. As Tiselius observed, quote, "One cannot in practice apply the principle that the Nobel Prize should be given to the person who is best. It is impossible to define who is best. Hence, there's only one alternative, to try to find a particularly worthy candidate." End quote. The admission captures the fundamental tension at the heart of the Nobel system, a prize premised on universal human benefit, administered through necessarily fallible human institutions, operating under rules written by a single man in the Victorian era, and largely unchanged ever since. And there you have it, my dear listener, Mr. Nobel and his wonderful world of prizes and their subsequent categories, and the one that was added by a bank. I hope you found it interesting. I find goofy shit like this interesting too much, and it triggers me to get into these deep dive kind of things because I'm a weird nerd. I found out a lot while looking into this. I mean, who knew that the guy who invented dynamite thought the only way to achieve peace was through blowing shit up and killing? Large weaponry is the way, is what I'm saying, is what he was saying. Is that my only takeaway? No, of course not. But it's a big one. I did learn one thing, though. Should you invent something that will go on killing people forever, just remember that prize money will make all that bad press coming your way go away. And eventually the world will love you. That's probably the wrong lesson to learn from all this, I'm pretty sure. But, I mean, at least I learned something, right? Thank you for listening to this episode of Elton Reads a Book a Week. If you liked it, please consider joining the Patreon so I can get paid to do this and it can be my job. I'd love for it to be my job. I do like this as a job. If, given the cultural, current, financial, yep, all that. If you don't want to chip in, that's fine. You can share the podcast and join all the social media. Follow me on all the social media. The podcast is everywhere, even on TikTok. There's a Snapchat out there somewhere. All of it. Just hit follow and share it with people that you like. And you can leave a rating and review. Those are nice too. If you can dole that out. Spotify apparently made it very easy. If you have any questions or anything, you can email me at eltonreadsabookAweek@gmail.com. And, all in all, thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. I don't know why I'm whispering to you. Still, thank you very much for listening. And I hope you have a fantastic day. All right? Thanks you again. And if you happen to run across a book this week, read it. Don't let them die out, for God's sake. All right, thank you again. Thank you.
And Elton reads a book a week. And Elton reads a book a week. Shut us out.